I'm a big fan of the supply and inventory quality conversation. There is a mindset change that needs to happen in this industry, and that mindset change is going from thinking scale first to thinking quality first. The facts are that bigger it's just no longer better. Providing quality is what's going to get you more spend than duplicating requests and going towards scale. Some publishers are starting to do this already, and those publishers, we're seeing data, they're winning, right? They're increasing revenue by taking these steps. So it's something where quality is already, we're seeing signs that it's winning, and over time it's just going to accelerate.
Welcome to the Pubway podcast. Each episode will showcase a conversation with a leader from the publishing world. If you're working at a publisher, a DSP or SSP, or you're just curious about the media industry and want to sit down and pick the brains of the experts from within the publishing space, then this is the show for you. Hello, and welcome to the Pubway podcast. My name is Tina Yanakino.
I'm Mike Villalobos, and in today's episode, we're going to be talking about curation, green packages within sustainability, the supply quality, and last but not least, focusing on biddable CTV and the opportunity that it has today.
And to talk about all these super fun topics, it's my pleasure to introduce Tyler Romasco, the Global SVP of Publisher Development at OpenX. Welcome, Tyler.
Hi, Mike. Hi, Tina. Thank you for having me on today. Very excited. Big fan of your podcast.
Thank you so much. Before we jump in, I would love to hear a brief introduction, your role currently at OpenX, a little bit about your career, just so our audience has a better idea about your perspective.
What do you actually do here?
Yeah, that's an important one. So my name is Tyler Romasco, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Global Publisher Development at OpenX. So what that means is I oversee the sales and business development teams, the account management teams, and the customer success engineering teams that work with all of our global publishers across every region. And as far as my background, I was on the buy side of programmatic for many years. So working very closely with agencies and brands, specifically at DSPs. So I worked at Rocket Fuel, and then I worked at Seismic, and then I even had a brief stint at Zeta Global before jumping full into the supply side 6 years ago at OpenX. So my background is really split the programmatic world, half of it servicing buyers and half of it servicing publishers, which has been a fun journey to say the least.
Rocket Fuel, that's a deep cut.
Yeah.
It's a throwback. It's a fun one. Everywhere you go, it feels like that network still exists.
Yep.
And it's a deep one. So
people recognize it no matter where you are, whether you've heard it as a legendary folk tale or if it's something you've experienced. But look, you've been on the buy side and also obviously the demand side. Things are defined very differently sometimes depending on the lens that you apply. I would love to understand before jumping into the nitty gritty, how do you define curation? And do you think there's a big disconnect between demand and supply when they define it as well?
Great question. Nothing like starting with an easy one, right? Right off the bat, we've got a hot topic. You can't have a single conversation these days without talking about curation.
Nope.
And to your point, I think it is important to define it. I think there's a bit of a disconnect between how the supply side and buy side defines it. But ultimately, I think we're starting to align on what we call at OpenX, and as we're talking to our buyers, really three pillars of curation. The first being inventory targeted curation. So this is really looking at some of the traditional targeting capabilities that an SSP has for where it sits close to the supply side, right? So if you think about things like removing MFA from deals or targeting direct publishers only, or packaging things like unique ad formats, that kind of all fits into the inventory curation bucket. The second bucket that we think of is really audience targeted curation. So these are buyers who are looking to target either first party or third party audience segments based on the matching of identifiers. So good examples there would be a buyer looking to match an audience based off of ramp IDs or ID5 or traditional identifiers like cookies and maids or even hashed email. And then the third bucket of curation, the way we think about it, is really data-driven curation. So these are more ID-free solutions and other activation types. So the one thing you can think about here are advanced contextual models. So there's companies out there who are taking the full bit stream of domains and they're applying their own data science and they're returning segments that are intent-based off of the content that somebody's consuming. Or there are things like performance-based models. So we use AI models today to effectively allow buyers to choose their KPI, whether those are things like CTR or conversions or viewability, and then we auto-optimize towards that. So there's really this data-driven layer of execution that's happening as well. And those are really the three major buckets of curation as we think about them.
No, that's great. And I think obviously, like you said, you really can't turn a corner without somebody shouting curation at you. I was on leave last year for maternal leave, and I feel like I blanked and I came back and curation was everywhere. Nobody was talking about it before I left. So definitely a hot topic, especially because we're the Pubway podcast, and publishers, I think, are often left behind in a lot of these kind of industry defining moments and how it affects their bottom line specifically. And with a lot of those curated deals now taking up a larger share of their inventory, how would you have publishers, I guess, better evaluate those options? It's not just repackaging open marketplace deals, and it's truly like curated impressions. Is there like a list you would suggest for that evaluation?
Yeah, I think you're making a great point, which is you're right. And publishers need to ask questions about this to basically understand what's incremental versus what's not. I think that's what it comes down to. And usually when I hear publishers who are, there's not many, but the ones that are more against curation, it's because of two reasons, right? One is it's the fear that it's just repackaging open market, just like you mentioned, and there isn't true value being created there. And then the second would be, when there is no value, what are the high non-transparent fees that these third-party curation platforms are taking, which they view as it's just reducing their CPM for something they feel like they would already be getting through open market, right? So those are really the two things that we hear the most. So if I'm a publisher, I'm asking some questions around that, right? That first goes back to the types of curation, right? So it's how are you packaging and selling curation? They should be asking their SSP partners. And that is the majority of what you do inventory-based curation? Or have you actually built proprietary tools and integrations with these third-party curators that are providing true value in the audience or data-driven categories, right? Because that's much more incremental to publishers than the inventory targeted bucket is. And then the second piece that they need to be asking is tell us how your fee structures work with your third-party curators that use your platform. And this should be a very straightforward answer. I can tell you what ours is, which is we have a contractual maximum that we allow third-party curators to take. We defined that years ago when we released our platform. And basically that's a fee that we feel comfortable is valid to take if you bring value to the ecosystem, right? And I think a lot of what's happening is there's platforms out there who haven't set contractual maximums with third-party curators. Therefore, they're taking these massive fees that we see, which are 50% plus. And I don't think there's a space for the future for people to continue to take that amount.
Yeah, I mean, within an SPO environment, it definitely makes it difficult. Now, out of curiosity, from the transparency component, do you look at controlling that augmentation cost as more of a percentage of spend, or just a fixed cost, fixed data fee off the shelf? What do you see kind of the best practice are?
We offer both, right? So I think it typically depends on how the third-party curator executes. Some of them work out it as packaging media plus data, and then some of them are more traditional data providers that you would think about, which is more of a fixed CPM cost. So either way, like I said, there should be contractual maximums, but there should also be platform capabilities is the important part here too, right? So as they're setting these fees within curation platforms, your platform needs to stop them from taking more than a certain amount. And those are the types of fail safes we've built in to keep monitoring that regardless of the fee structure they decide on.
Makes sense. And I guess when going between unique demand and driving incremental value, how have you guys measured that, either anecdotally or how have you seen that in the field in general? Like, what are the things that are being done that can provide that value chain, but more importantly, prove it and not just say, oh, we have our own sales team, it'll drive incremental.
Yeah. Just shifting dollars
exactly
around.
Yeah, no, this is great. So yes, we don't want to just lift and shift, right? You want to provide incrementality and increase revenue. And what we have specifically done, I'll speak for us. I think all platforms should follow this model. Is every quarter we release stats around our curation and the deals that we provide, right? So we did our Q1 release, which was out of our entire curated deals that we run today, 60% of those are using advanced forms of curation targeting, meaning they either have audience targeting applied or they have data-driven tactics applied. So only 40% of it is truly inventory-only based targeting. And then what that's led to for publishers is across all those curated deals, what we reported out on is we've seen an increase in CPM by 27% in CTV, by 35% in display when you compare that to open market, and then a win rate increase of 260% in CTV and 130% in display. So what that's showing you is we're providing incrementality based off the audience and data targeted deals that we're driving. But through the CPM and win rates, you're showing that these bids are much more valuable than open market and are providing that incremental value. So it's that transparency in reporting that publishers should be digging into as well with their SSP partners in order to understand that incrementality piece.
Absolutely. And I think the transparency piece we're going to keep just hammering home this year. It seems to be one of the year of transparency. Maybe might call it now, for better or for worse. And I think you can't really talk about transparency without also talking about the quality of the supply you're working with, because it is a two-way street. So I feel like there's a lot of tactics around request duplication or multi-hop reselling that do impact buyers' performance and also the publisher's trust. And how is kind of OpenX approaching that conversation?
So I'm a big fan of the supply and inventory quality conversation. I think that this is a great question. And to your point, Tina, I think it's only going to increase in importance, right? As far as publishers think about how are they perceived from brands and agencies and buyers and DSPs in general. The way we break it down on supply quality is really two different pieces, right? The first is more of what we call the big rocks, right? Those are the MFAs, the frauds, the bot traffics. Those are the things that we see we need to do a better job of still, but we get a lot of coverage on that, right? We see the ANA and analytics reports that come out. It gets a lot of press and a lot of coverage, and it's always pushed to the front. The second piece that we think quality is really moving towards is the piece that you're hitting on directly, which is request duplication, right? And if you think about it from a buyer lens, the reason they don't like request duplication is because effectively what the supply side is doing is we're flooding already constrained DSP QPS pipes with the same requests over and over and over and over, right? What that leads to is that reduces the amount of true unique opportunities that a buyer can see and have the opportunity to show advertising to their customers. So that's the problem we're seeing from the buy side. The why it's occurring is super important though. And what we see is there's two major factors that are leading to request duplication. The first you had touched on, which is multi-hop reselling, right? And I'm going to give you a real stat, which is we observe the S chain in our exchange to understand how many hops a piece of single request takes before it makes it into the OpenX SSP. We have seen up to 19 hops within the S chain, which means that request was sent to 19 resellers, and likely multiple of those resellers are sending us the same request. So that's one issue that's causing request duplication. The second issue that's causing it is really it's being enabled by SSPs and ad servers. Some of them have created multi-tapping functionality, which allows a publisher to go into their platform and define how many times they want to send a single request to an SSP. And that's really just gamification tactics, knowing that you can receive more bids back from a DSP and you have a higher chance to win.
I was like, it's interesting because I'm starting to see a lot of like SSPs just open up QPS restraints and just flood the market. And that's causing, to your point, the duplication patterns over and over again. And it's the same advertisers from the same SSPs bidding on whatever they want.
It's like a pinball machine.
And look, I will tell anybody listening, this was a hot topic at Possible in Miami. Multiple DSPs and buyers we talked to, they're aware of this. And some of them were talking, and in case anybody doesn't think you can already report on it, right? You can identify publishers that are doing this more than others. And there are folks talking about starting to shift spend towards partners who create cleaner supply paths, or platforms in the middle creating functionality where you can start to optimize away from people who do too much request duplication. So this has got to be a focus.
And I'm not sure if this is more of the publisher focus or more of the SSP focus, but what can be done to declutter this noise, right? Do you think it's incumbent on the publisher to figure out the right SSP partner, or the SSP partner just to figure out their QPS constraints?
I think it's both, right? I think it's incumbent on both as we move forward. The two things that I usually say here are, one, there's a mindset change that needs to happen in this industry. And that mindset change is going from thinking scale first to thinking quality first, right? So for years, companies in this industry, even buyers are included in this statement, buyers, publishers, ad tech, everybody chased scale, right? And you heard the word scale was most important and the biggest was most important. And the facts are that bigger it's just no longer better, right? So it's this change that quality will win in the mid to long term. I feel very confident about that. And providing quality is what's going to get you more spend than duplicating requests and going towards scale. And we've seen, Mike, to your point, some publishers are starting to do this already, right? And some steps that they're taking are we see publishers reducing the amount of SSPs they're working with, right? They're focusing more on a limited set of what they consider quality partners that are aligned with their strategy. And then within that, they're creating super clean supply paths with really good signals, less request duplication. And those publishers, we're seeing data, they're winning, right? They're increasing revenue by taking these steps. So it's something where quality is already, we're seeing signs that it's winning, and over time it's just going to accelerate.
Yeah, and I think we also keep touching upon words like clean, quality, less is more. And I think one of the inherent factors of SPO is sustainability and having kind of like a lower carbon footprint, greener emissions. And something I saw recently, I think it was Scott Messer in one of the trades, he started bringing up DPO, demand optimization, because you can't talk about just supply without demand. So with that in mind, what could like a more meaningful sustainability strategy look like beyond the supply path optimization?
Yes. Awesome question. We love talking about sustainability. I think, look, I don't want to discount it. Supply path optimization is super important. We need to continue to do work there. But a lot of times what I feel like it's driven is it's removing good publishers from advertiser campaigns based off of how many folks do you have in your ads.txt file, right? That's a very simplistic way of looking at it. We've got to continue that work, and SPO will be a part of it. But I think that there is another question here, which is there's a major change that we need to think about, and that's actually looking at our own emissions footprint.
Mm-hmm.
So each of us as our own business, how much emissions are you releasing based off of your server footprint, right? What about your work travel that all of your employees are doing? What about your office and your heating and cooling usage, right? And really the first step in that I think is the most important one is we need to get transparent on every company in this space reporting on their emissions, right? It's getting it out there and knowing where you are. You're not expected to be perfect. That's not the goal here. But reporting on it is what starts to increase accountability across all of us as an industry and force each of us to take incremental steps to get better and better year over year. But it's that reporting and the transparency in emissions that's the key first step.
Yeah. If I'm being honest, one of the biggest, issues that I have with the sustainability movement is the fact that we look at it at a campaign level, which it's to be honest, it's similar to looking at vanity metrics within the advertising ecosystem on the demand side, right? It's like I'm looking at viewability, I'm looking at CTR, all top line metrics that are table stakes that should actually be again on that. Yes, is an obvious, but what's the yes and? Because beyond campaign, to your exact point, there's server costs, there's data costs, there's data centers, whether it be on-prem or in the cloud, all have their own separate, I think, challenges there. How could someone go about at least adjusting for the computing sustainability efforts? To your point, yes, emissions on like travel, et cetera, that becomes a little bit more of a gray area. But looking at the supply chain, what can a publisher or a supply side platform do to optimize for efficiency there?
Yeah, great points, Mike. Right. So for some reason when you said it's like the campaign level reporting is just not the whole picture, right? It's a fraction of the picture that we're looking at, and we need to broaden that to start to look at the whole
performance at that point.
Exactly right. And it's this thought of like, just think, what if every company in the space agreed that over the next 3 to 5 years, we're all going to reduce our actual emissions output by 20%. That's huge, right? That's meaningful change that we're talking about. So to your point, what can you do? Look, OpenX as a business, look, as far as we know, we're the first and only company in the advertising technology or media space to effectively receive independent verification that we've met our key requirements of net zero standard based off the Science-Based Targeting Initiative, right? And that was a lot of work. It started back in 2019. And to your point, from the tech side, we actually replatformed the whole business, right? We went from on-prem servers to 100% cloud-based. And that was step one, right? Using servers that were powered by renewable energy through the cloud, right? And that's just one piece of it. But the point here is this isn't to sit here and say OpenX is the best. The point is to say other companies can do it.
Yeah, right.
We've shown that you can operate a very scaled business in a very sustainable way, actually reducing your carbon emissions by over 90%. That's what it takes to be SBTI verified, right? And that's super important. And we hope, if nothing else, people look at it and say, hey, we can do this. But the number one thing I keep going back to, I sound like a broken record. The first thing we did back in 2009 before we decided to replatform is we measured it, right? We brought in third parties to help us measure the carbon emissions footprint. And then over the last few years, we publicized all of those numbers.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think we all can take some tips and tricks from this conversation as we're looking at commitments to make in the coming years. It's not going anywhere as the world's on fire around us, but I digress. We've kind of dabbled a little bit in CTV, another super hot topic in the industry. I'd love to dive in a bit more, especially how it relates to programmatic linear. What is holding programmatic linear back from scaling? Is it more of a tech challenge? Is it measurement related? With how big of an opportunity CTV is, it feels kind of counterproductive that it's not scaling as effectively as it should.
Yeah, it's a tough one. We've had a lot of discussions around it as a business, and look, in my opinion, it's both, right? I think it's a tech challenge and a measurement challenge. So look, on the tech and the inventory side, fragmentation is a big challenge, right? So when we think about linear TV being split across MVPDs, across broadcasters, across tech platforms. So kind of unlike digital, there's no single universal standard or unified platform, which makes it really hard to execute in an automated way, especially as you think about cross-network buys, right? So the way we kind of joke about it internally is it feels very program manual right now, right? It's like every time you go to execute, it's like coordinating a million different pieces, which doesn't feel automated at all, right? It feels just, like I said, fragmented. The measurement side is the same thing, right? In linear, we talk about GRPs, right? In digital, we talk about CPMs. Rectifying these things can be very difficult. And ultimately, I just think that there's no widely adopted or real-time system for measurement that matches the granularity of what we see in digital, right? So without that consistent platform attribution, it becomes harder to justify automated buying models based off of performance or for performance buyers, which is really what they're looking to CTV to be more of now, if you're a programmatic first buyer.
That's 100% right. I think one of the biggest challenges that we've even seen on our end is you're starting to see folks who want to buy biddable linear, but you're buying a spot. That spot doesn't guarantee the amount of impressions. Back to the GRP conversation, right? So you're buying this $2 spot. Sounds great. Then you're like, after the fact, what now? What impressions were dealt? But it's also tough because, to your point of fragmentation, you don't understand also co-viewing, understanding that that's not considered inside the programmatic ecosystem as well. There's a lot of nuance that plays into that. But that aside, with the measurement component, how do you define quality within biddable on linear, right? Is it defined as an affluent area? Is it defined as the device they're watching it on? I don't know, but I think it's really interesting to get your take on that, just because of the fact that we're starting to see folks trying to build a framework around it, but it hasn't really landed quite yet.
Yeah, this is so I can tell you about how we define quality when it comes to biddable CTV. This is an important one that we talk to buyers about a lot. And this is actually one of the major areas we've had success based off how we've shaped our supply quality. So when we're talking to buyers, here's how I think about it. Really is the first is you're looking for direct publisher inventory, right? So we're kind of avoiding some of the pitfalls of what we did in web and app, which is, and what I talked about earlier in this podcast, which is that the reselling and the multi-hop reselling, right? So you want premium direct inventory from broadcasters, OEMs, and fast channels. That point is extremely important because when you're talking to linear buyers and you're trying to get them comfortable with shifting to biddable, the number one objection we heard starting, 2.5 years ago since we made this change was that I don't feel comfortable with the supply I'm buying. I'm looking at my reporting. I don't understand it. I see resellers, etc. So point one is direct publisher inventory is super important in biddable. Point two that we talk to people about is you should be looking for glass on wall, right? And that laid back TV-like experience, specifically across video on demand or live television. And then the third way we define biddable is really, we truly feel that it shouldn't include UGC content. It shouldn't include gaming. And it shouldn't include unintentional content like background apps. Best example there is during the holidays, you throw on the Fireplace app on your television and then you go off and you socialize with the family, right? It's not to say that there isn't good advertising opportunities within those buckets, but we just define that as video and not CTV. And really those are the three criteria we're talking about when we think about quality biddable CTV.
Yeah, and I think it's obviously going to constantly evolve. I mean, we saw QR codes come out of nowhere again a few years ago, and secondary screens now playing a much larger part in the viewing experience, which wasn't really thought of as premium before. And there's a ton of really cool companies doing awesome things in that space now. But as publishers who have to be kind of multi-platform, multi-device, looking at kind of web and app and all the risk and challenges that surface in development of those platforms, what should they do to kind of avoid replicating those problems within the CTV space as publishers are now scaling their footprints there?
Yeah, that's a good question. Comes back to the quality piece, right? So the first thing I would recommend is be careful with how many resellers you work with, right? That is something we are talking to buyers about every single day when it comes to biddable CTV. We're being very transparent with reporting on where it's coming from. Through our platform and our TV by OpenX offering, you just don't get resellers, period. We cut them out of our exchange entirely, right? So that's step one. But I really think the thing with CTV publishers that they need to be focused on is they need to have a really tight strategy around their first party data and their content metadata, right? So what happened in the web and the app world is due to buy side pressure, they ended up dumping all their first party signals into the open market bid stream. And then from there, DSPs saw that and effectively did what their algorithms are programmed to do, which is drop the price down, right? That's just what the algorithms are programmed to do,
If
right?
there's resources there, I'm going to use them.
Exactly, right? I'm going to use those resources, and then for my buyer, I'm going to drive the price down rather than thinking about publisher yield. What we're seeing with CTV is they're banding together in a really great way, these publishers, right? And they're holding from providing those content metadata signals unless it's a fair value exchange, right? So as a publisher, what we're seeing a lot of is many of them are setting up inventory for a cheaper price, but you're restricting the content signals that are passed there. And then there's an inventory set for a more expensive price, and there's more content signal available there, right? And I think that's a really great strategy, and I think they're doing a great job because CTV content is super expensive to produce. We know that. And in order to do that, we have to pay. And in order to do that and also get the signal you want as a buyer, you have to be able to pay the price for it. So publishers who are doing that in the CTV world, I think we're doing really well. And it's a good strategy.
I think it's interesting because we've seen this play out not just in the US, but across every global market, depending on signals that you get back. It could be, there's limitations of the GDPR, but they're still finding ways around certain signals, right? Obviously TCPA. So looking at this from a macro global standpoint, and advanced TV being such a big opportunity for growth and also has shown massive growth. What are certain parts of the world that you see accelerating faster than the US or keeping pace in terms of adopting advanced TV, adopting biddable, adopting viewership? Would love to see understand what you're seeing on your side.
Yeah, it's funny, as I took the global role on towards the end of last year, I'm getting into these new regions, right? I'm getting into Latin America and Europe and APAC, and I'm seeing how different the market functions when it comes to thinking about CTV, OTT, and video, right? When I defined biddable CTV earlier for you, that's a really US-centric approach, I said, because the supply is there and it's available, right? There's massive supply volume when we talk about streaming biddable CTV. In other markets, there's not, right? So Latin America and APAC, they're growing quickly in the streaming and the CTV space, but really how consumers behave there is they're much more likely to consume on their mobile devices, right? They're not in front of TVs as much as we are. They're on their iPads, their phones, and places like that. So crafting a scalable strategy for publishers in those regions that incorporate being able to package CTV alongside OTT and then even online video, and packaging that at different price points that allow the buyer to achieve their KPIs and their reach metrics, it becomes super important for those regions. So that's something I see accelerating. While CTV growth will continue there, the mobile usage I don't see slowing down whatsoever. So in those markets, that packaging becomes much more important.
Yeah, I think it's helpful to step out of our North America bubble every once in a while. And there's a lot of really cool markets and opportunities for growth. So it's great to hear kind of the differing perspectives. I think we also keep circling the measurement pool a bit here. And another hot topic of the industry obviously is made for advertising, MFA, or honestly made for arbitrage is what I say it more. Most publishers do make their sites for advertising. So I find that definition a little funny. But I think what is the risk that publishers do face when MFA measurement lacks consistency across vendors? There are players out there. We use the Jounces of the world, the Humans, etc. But publishers are often caught in kind of the gray area of these super definitive definitions about it without really having a say in it.
Yeah, this one is an unfortunate one, but look, the fact is that when we lack inconsistency in standards and measurement, publishers are just flat out good publishers are being excluded from media campaigns, and it's hurting their revenue, right? And I'll give you an example, which was 2 years ago. We decided we were going to build in an ability into the platform to effectively, we exclude MFA on every single deal we set up as a business, right? And we looked at 2 different measurement vendors, and they provided us domain lists of MFA publishers. And one of them, the list was literally thousands of domains more than the other. And when we were going down the domain list, we're like, wait, there are great publishers on here, great brand names. People would never consider that MFA. And when we asked the measurement partner to provide their guidelines for how they measure MFA, the answer was, well, we can't tell you exactly because that's our secret sauce, right? To me, that's just not an acceptable answer when we're talking about
Monetization and
monetization and things as important as MFA, or you put fraud and bot traffic and other things into that bucket as well. So that's the real problem.
Yeah, and MFA inherently does penalize a lot of the mid to long tail publishers, those who don't have the resources or strength of the tier ones. There's certain communities that do consume content in a higher ad density experience, listicles, gallery pages, etc. But they're real people doing the pages. We're in the industry, but I love the chat where it's like, are you a human? Because you're going through these things really fast. Like, I am, sorry. It's just, I have ADD a little bit. It's like jumping around the page.
Me too.
What's fascinating is listicles are an example of this, where give me the top 20 laptops of whatever year, right? And you can go in there and kind of cruise through that. That would be considered MFA, but that's also considered high intent because you're looking to buy and you're showing purchase buying behaviors, right? So they're counterintuitive, but also let's not forget the open web is free because of advertising. So it has to be made for advertising.
Yeah, exactly. Publishers are the only people not allowed to market themselves in this industry.
Correct. So I guess what I'm trying to get at, Tyler, is what can we do? And I mean, on the publisher side or SSP side or even DSP side, what can we do to actually better standardize this? Is it everybody getting in a room through the IAB or whatever coalition and figure this out? Or is it someone become the gold standard on the measurement side? A lot of ways you can cut this, but would love to hear your opinion on it.
I think I'm hoping it's a little bit of both, right?
Sure.
So what I mean by that is 100% I support everybody getting involved in doing this through the IAB, like most initiatives, right? That's where everybody can be represented across the entire ecosystem. That's where publishers have a voice, ad tech has a voice, buyers have a voice, right? We can publicly comment on all of these different initiatives they have. And I know that there's been discussions around MFA, and I encourage everybody to get involved in that. So I really, truly think we need a standardization to solve this. To your point around the gold standard, look, the partner we ended up choosing in our specific platform to do this and for all of our measurement was, you mentioned it, which is Jounce Media and Chris Kane, right? The reason we chose them is because they're transparent about their methodology, right? They told us how they were doing it and how they were measuring it. And we're like, okay, we can get behind this. We support that. He listened to our feedback for that methodology as well, right? And it's companies who are going to be more transparent, I'm hoping can accelerate these things through the IAB rather than trying to keep it as a black box of special sauce that they're trying to sell, right? And I think that's the important part when we think about how do we standardize it.
Absolutely. And I was in the IAB coalition, the new MFA one, a couple months ago, and it was spicy. It was great though. Everyone was all sides across the ecosystem were arguing, debating, speaking up, and I'm excited to see where that conversation goes.
And that's the tea.
Yeah.
I always say if you want some drama, join an IAB call because it's fun.
Yeah, that's fair.
As it should be, right? That's the opinions and that's the voice of the industry. Right? And it moves slow at times, but the reality is when the standards are released, we all benefit from them, right? Everybody benefits, and it creates transparency and trust at the end of the day. And that's the important part of all the IAB standards, including the MFA one that's going around.
Love it. Creating transparency and trust feels like a good kind of closing thought for our discussion. But before we let you go, I would love to hear what your thoughts are on one kind of key industry trend that our audience can kind of keep an eye on.
Yes. Let me think here. So it wouldn't be a conversation without mentioning AI, right? So
we almost made it.
Companies who embrace AI will be winners, and those who fight change are going to struggle. So the way we're thinking about it at OpenX is really, it's about approachable AI, right? Not super complex and complicated, but you have to make AI approachable. And essentially, how can we make media buying easier and better for our partners, Right now, we're working on solutions that harness deep neural networks to curate the highest value inventory to deliver against specific advertiser goals, which is already driving real impact for them. And then in turn, it's offering publishers improved revenue potential without sacrificing the control. So that's the piece of AI and the trend I think we need to continue down. And that's the shift that people should watch. And like I said, embrace it. Don't fight it.
I think there's a really big importance to have human in the loop as you're building these models out, mainly for the fact that intent and sentiment is still very subjective, right? MFA still very subjective. So as you have these gray areas, it's tough to teach a machine how to operate within that gray area. Now, is it possible in the future? Potentially, right? As things get more cognition and there's more understanding around culture and nuance, there is a big possibility that for the time being, I definitely agree with you that being in the loop, having guardrails are only going to help the publisher and also the demand side to unify.
Fully agree with that. I think that's the exact right way to think about it. And it's gonna evolve quickly, right? This is one of the biggest changes and fastest coming changes we've seen in the industry are all the applications of AI.
It's the new .com, I guess you can say.
It is.
We're in it. We're in the future. Well, Tyler, thank you so much. Would love to have you back anytime.
Awesome. Thanks, Tina and Mike. It was awesome as always. I appreciate you having me on.
Of course. Thank you.